I didn't understand it at first, that I thought I was being loved. I thought don't go meant you matter. I thought a hand on my wrist in the doorway was tenderness and not fear. And that fear, if you kept it warm and fed, would grow into devotion. I mistook company for love the way some people mistake hunger for character. As if wanting hard enough could make a thing true. He didn't want a wife. Not really. He wanted someone who didn't leave. I learned it slow. The way you learn a house, by walking it in the dark without turning on the lights. You count steps. You feel the edge of the table with your thigh. You stop bruising eventually, not because the furniture moved, but because the body becomes a map. We met in a season when I had already said too many goodbyes. You can only bury so much before you begin to live like a careful person. My father had been ill and mercurial, my mother sturdy and silent. The kind of woman who kept the calendar in her head and the sorrow in her bones. I came into love like a student with too many sharpened pencils prepared for tests. That mayn't ever come. Expecting red marks for the wrong answers in a language no one fully taught me. He entered like weather, not dramatic, not slow, just present. He had a softness around the eyes, a way of tilting his head when I spoke, a laugh that didn't ask me to earn it. He held doors not like a performance but like muscle memory. I believed in that. I still do. We are built from what we repeat. He liked plans. He liked a weak pin to the board with clean corners. He liked the comfort of knowing who would be where at what time. He liked me. There inside the plan, my name a small anchor across the calendar squares. He never asked me to dim. He never said don't dream. He simply preferred my dreams within reach of his hand, so he could touch them when the room got quiet. We married in a church that smelled like lemon polish. There were white flowers and a cousin who cried more than I did in a photograph of us on the steps, with air between our shoulders like room to grow. People said we looked steady, and I hoped they were right. In the beginning, he loved best in the mirror of routine. A bowl set out for my keys near the door. A second mug waiting because I forget, always, to run the dishwasher at night. A soft knock before entering when I was writing. Although sometimes he entered and left the door open behind him, which is the same thing as leaving a question in the room that I had to answer with my concentration. He liked me close. He liked me available. He liked me in the next room, even if we weren't speaking. He called that intimacy. I called it proximity. We were both right and both wrong. The first time I saw the shape of his need, it was small. I was late. Not careless, just living. Traffic sighed and lifted. The city decided whether to be kind. When I opened the door, his relief hit me like heat. Where were you? He asked, and then, seeing my face, softened it into, I was worried. I kissed him and said, I'm here. I meant it like comfort. He took it like oxygen. After that, his questions multiplied in the gentle way moss covers a stone. What time will you be back? Will you text when you leave? Who's going to be there? Do you need me to come get you? It wasn't control. Not at first. It was fear ranged like care. I answered because love is generous. I answered because I liked being considered. I answered until I realized I was proving something I didn't want to be on trial for my staying. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a guarantee. When my aunt fell ill across town, I went twice a week. In hospitals, time moves like a tired elevator. There are floors you intended to reach and floors you end up on, because you pressed the wrong button with a shaking hand. I came home smelling like antiseptic and the last good try. He held me. He said, I'm proud of you. And then, will you be home earlier on Thursdays? I sleep better when you're here. It sounds sweet. It was sweet. It was also a column in the ledgers we kept without meaning to. His rest balanced against my leaving. My friends understood before I did. One by one, they drifted to the door at dinner, glancing at their phones, saying, go, he's waiting. Not with malice. With the coddling respect we show men who look gentle while asking for the world. I checked my watch at laughter. I left early at joy. I learned the exact minute that turned I'm having a life into I'm making someone anxious. And I did not cross it. If you train a dog with a bell, the bell doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be consistent. He liked to know I was reachable. He liked me to say be right there, even when no one needed me for anything in particular. He liked my presence on the couch beside him while he scrolled through strangers' kitchens, and my head resting on his shoulder like proof we were real. I like that kind of evening too. I just don't like it every evening. I just don't like it as a religion. When I asked for space, he said, from what? As if space must be a reaction rather than a room in the house of a person. He would open his arms and say, come here, like a solution, and sometimes it was. The body is a quick healer. The heart is slower and more honest. I began to notice when my yes hardened. In the throat. Behind the sternum. A small stone forming around my agreement. Double quotes, yes, I'll stay home, stone, yes. I'll text the minute I leave, stone, yes. I'll bring the book to the couch instead of the porch. Stones make walls if you're not careful. We were careful. We called them safety. His mother had left when he was 7, not in a dramatic midnight. Not with a suitcase she left in small renunciations. A job that asked for evenings. A silence that stretched over Saturdays. A laugh that returned louder when she came back from somewhere bright. I met her once. The body remembers a shame you'd rather not name. She kissed my cheek and brought a gift too expensive, doing penance with tissue paper and a ribbon. He didn't talk about her. He talked around her. He talked about certainties and calendars, and something he called foundation, by which he meant, I will not be abandoned again. Sometimes we build cathedrals to fear and call them homes. I didn't want to be the priest of his cathedral. I wanted to be a woman. The first time I said I need a day, just mine, he nodded. He meant it. He told me to take the car, told me to breathe, told me to send a picture when I reached the lake. I did. He replied with a heart. And then, an hour later, are you still there? Then? What are you thinking about? Then? I can pick you up if you're done. I'm not a cruelty. I said. I'm good, I said. I love you, I said. I'll be home for dinner. I came home a little earlier than I meant to. Ghosts are persuasive that way. He cooked. He played music. He made a joke about the ducks at that lake acting like they could own real estate. He tried so sweetly it hurt. He put his hand on my knee and tapped a rhythm I recognized from childhood, not mine. His a drumbeat of don't go too far. We tried therapy. The counselor was kind, which is to say she refused to take sides. She asked us to describe a perfect evening. He said, she's next to me, I said. I hear myself think and no one is threatened by it. She asked him what next to me meant. He said, sometimes just in the house. I know she's there. In my chest unlocks, she asked me what hear myself think meant. I said, a whole afternoon in a room with a window, and my name in it. He looked at me like I was asking for a continent. Asterisk, he said, you make me whole. And everyone nodded because it sounds like a compliment. I said, I am not the missing piece. I am a person. He picked up that sentence like a fragile cup. He tried to drink from it without burning his mouth. We made agreements like people make rafts. 2 nights a week were mine without question. One night was his the way he needed it, me close, the TV low. The comfort of my breath in rhythm with his. Sundays we touched each other and didn't call it a solution. It helped. It didn't heal. Dependence wears the same cologne as devotion if you don't smell closely. When my friend asked me to travel for a weekend to help her pack up a life that had become too heavy, I said yes the way you say yes to duty and to joy. His face folded into worry so neatly I almost apologized for the invitation. That had not come from me. 2 nights, he said, trying to make it practical. Could we do 1 night? He was negotiating with her. I'll call you when I get there, I said. He said, okay. He meant, please don't leave me alone with the room where she didn't come back. I held his face in my hands and said, I always come back, he nodded. Which is what people do when their fear knows the door codes better than you do. Fear is smart. It remembers exits more than entrances. I went. I helped. I laughed. I cried in a grocery aisle when she stood looking at a brand of cereal she'd always bought for a man who no longer loved mornings. I learned again that freedom and sorrow share a spine. I called him. I sent photos of stupid motel artwork in a sky so wide it could hold a loneliness without breaking. He picked me up at the station with flowers. He kissed me with the eagerness of a boy who had won an affair. He ran a bath. He said, I missed you in every chair. He meant it romantically. I heard it like inventory. I can love a man's ache and still refuse to become his medicine. The night it all named itself, it was raining. The kind that soaks truth through a roof. We sat at the table with our old arguments folded like napkins. He said, I think I'm better when you're near. And I said, I think you could be whole even when I'm gone. He said, why would I want that? And the room answered with silence because the room was tired of the same sermon. I told him about the boy he used to be, the one with the backpack waiting by the window, and I told him I would not keep answering for her. He cried like a man who had been holding his breath since 7. I held him because I am not made of stone. I held him because love is not a courtroom where we prove who hurt first. But when the crying slowed, I said clearly, I will not be your proof that people stay. I will be your partner. He looked at me like a cliff looks at the ocean, worn and astonished that the shape could change. We made a new plan. Not a raft. A shore. He would learn to sit with the feeling that didn't have my name on it. I would stay without dissolving. We would mark Thursdays as separate on purpose. 2 lives side by side. Both alive. Both trusted to return. He failed the first Thursday. He texted 11 times. I answered twice. I love you. I'm here. I'm not available. He didn't sleep. I did. We tried again. He failed less. I apologized less. We learned the difference between reassurance and truth. He didn't want a wife. He wanted someone who didn't leave. And I wanted a husband who could stay. even with the lights out. Here is a quiet miracle. And it didn't happen with confetti. He began to notice when the fear was speaking. He began to say, "That's 7-year-old me." He began to breathe through an hour without my location like a runner learning hills. We made a ritual of returns that didn't look like tests. I came back from the grocery store and he said, "How was the aisle that makes you cry?" And I said, "Merciful today." And we laughed because mercy had become a word with chairs in it. When I traveled again, he asked me 2 questions instead of 20. When will you enjoy yourself most? And what should I cook for the day you come home? Presence is not a leash. It is a table set with care. I am not naive. There are days he wants to ask for guarantees I don't keep in my pockets. There are days I want to offer them because I like peace, and he is a gentleman. And it feels good to be the answer to a question you did not cause. But I can say, "I love you" without saying, "I'll be in the next room at all times." He can say, "I'm scared" without saying, "Come fix it, we are clumsy." We are trying. We hold hands that now understand the difference between holding and gripping. I didn't understand it at first. I do now. Marriage is not the absence of doors. It is knowing how to walk through them and come back with stories. He didn't want a wife. He wanted someone who didn't leave. He married me. I didn't leave. I arrived. And he slowly, painfully, honestly learned to do the same. There is a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty anymore. The kind that holds space instead of swallowing it. That's where we found ourselves after the first season of trying. Not healed. Not newly born, just quieter in a way that made room for truth to sit down without knocking. I stopped using the word space like a threat or a test. I stopped saying it with my armor on, like I was ready to defend myself if he flinched. I started saying it like a room I would actually return from. I'm going to read on the porch for a while. Not, I need to escape you. But I need to remember myself. At first, I could feel him track me. Not physically, emotionally. The way some people listen for a kettle whistle even when the stove is off. He would walk to the doorway, lean there, arms crossed loosely like he was practicing casual. He'd say something small. "What are you reading? Cold out there. You want tea?" And I would answer because answering is not surrender. Answering is participation. But I did not invite him to stay. And he did not ask to. That was new. That was ours. One day, he didn't come to the doorway at all. I sat on the porch for almost an hour. The sky was the color of faded denim, winter just beginning to clear its throat. I listened to birds practicing their arguments in the trees, the air shivering around them. When I came back inside, I found him at the kitchen table, elbows on the wood, looking at nothing in particular. Not sad, not waiting, just letting time exist without using me to measure it. He looked up like I was part of the landscape. "Not the weather, welcome back," he said. "Welcome back. Not where were you? Not was it long? Not why didn't you text? Just welcome back." I stood there for a moment with my hands still on the doorframe. Like the house needed to adjust to a new rule. I could leave a room and remain loved. He didn't know what he'd done. I didn't tell him. Not right away. Some miracles are tender. You don't clap for them while they're still forming. We began practicing separation without fear. It sounds simple. It is not. Fear builds muscle memory. It knows how to run faster than reassurance. When I went to the grocery store, he asked only, "Do you want company?" And here's the thing, I said no. Not because I didn't want him near, but because I wanted my footsteps to belong only to me for a little while. He nodded. No twitch, no deep breath before speaking. Just nodding, quiet, trusting. Trust is when you stop rehearsing disasters on Thursdays. I went to a bookstore cafe across town. A place with mismatched chairs and coffee that tasted like forgiveness. At first, he texted once halfway through. "Hope you're having a good day." Just that. Then we tried something even harder. No text at all. Not silence, confidence. Returning home became something to look forward to, not something to monitor. Some days I'd open the door and he'd be playing music, old, warm soul records that sound like memory being dusted off. Other days he'd be reading, glasses slipping down his nose, one finger holding his place in the story even as he looked up to greet me, "Welcome back." He'd say again. It became our prayer. Meanwhile, I had my own work. Not just the porch and the bookstore and the lamp that made the evenings feel like confession. I had to learn how to not apologize for needing air. Women are trained explicitly, indirectly, relentlessly to shrink where others expand. We apologize when we sit down, when we stand up, when we breathe too loudly. I had to relearn the shape of my own voice. I stopped saying sorry. Sorry, can I sorry? But I started saying, I need, I believe, I'm not available right now. I'll return, I'm here. And he didn't explode. He didn't accuse. He didn't crumble. He listened. Fear teaches people to brace for storms that never come. Love teaches them to open the windows anyway. Asterisk, there was one night, a small one. Nothing cinematic, that told me he was really changing. I was brushing my hair before bed. He was already under the covers, eyes soft from reading. He said, without looking up from his book, will you stay close tonight? Not, don't leave me. Not, I need you or I'll drown. Just, I miss you. I walked to the bed and got in beside him. Not because he asked, but because I wanted to. He closed the book and rested his head near mine, not gripping, not clutching. Just arriving, his breathing steadied first. Mine followed. We didn't fix each other. We learned not to disappear. Asterisk, when people ask me now, how did you get him to change? I say, I didn't. I arrived in my own life and he chose to meet me there. Some men can't, some won't. But he did, not perfectly. Not quickly. Not without nights when fear paced the hallway like an old dog who doesn't know where to sleep anymore. But he did, and I stopped leaving myself to stay with someone else. We sleep in the same bed. Not as to bodies taking attendance, as to people who know the way back to themselves and still choose each other at the end of the day. Not because of fear, because of presence, because of witness, because love isn't proved by staying. Love is proved by returning. It's strange how the body remembers fear even after the mind stops rehearsing it. Some nights, when the house is too quiet and the clock is loud enough to sound like judgment, I feel my muscles brace for the old ritual, his hand reaching for mine like a check-in. Me answering with a squeeze up meant I didn't leave. It was never about affection then. It was inventory. Now, when he reaches, it's different. He pauses halfway like a diver learning new water and waits for me to meet him. Some nights I do. Some nights I turn, tuck into his chest, and let my ear find that steady drawn that says we're both still here. Some nights I stay on my back and let our hands rest in the middle like a bridge, not a lifeline. He doesn't panic. He doesn't say, what's wrong? As if everything tender must be a problem. He lets the night have more than one shape. We learn touch again the way you learn a language as adults, slowly, listening more than speaking. Forgiving the accent. He had used closeness like insurance. I had used it like proof. Now we used it like presence. A palm on a shoulder while passing in the hall. A hand at the small of my back, not to steer, just to say, I notice you. A kiss before bed that didn't ask for anything after. And then because it didn't ask sometimes everything after. There was a night in summer that felt like a hinge. The air had that heavy sweetness after rain, the kind you can taste. We lay facing each other, the window open, the curtains barely moving. He said, I'm tempted to count how many nights you stay close. I won't. I think counting is how I make fear look reasonable. I laughed softly, because I knew that temptation to adding up proofs until love feels like a ledger. What if we count questions instead? I said. Tonight we ask each other one we've never asked. He nodded. He waited. He didn't rush to go first like a man performing vulnerability. He let the quiet collect around us until the question that arrived belonged to the room, not to effort. What do you want me to stop apologizing for? He asked. I thought he'd say leaving my mug by the sink or speaking too softly when I'm angry. He said, for needing time alone. I felt something unclench in a place no doctor can find. I answered honestly too. I want you to stop apologizing for missing me when I'm gone. He blinked. Surprised. Doesn't that trap you? It does when it's a demand, I said. It doesn't when it's a weather report. We started speaking like that, forecasts instead of warnings. I feel a storm coming, he'd say on a Thursday. 7-year-old me is jangling, I'd answer, I'm packing an umbrella, not canceling the trip. And we would both smile because we had finally learned the difference. I could prepare without abandoning myself. He could name fear without deputizing me to fix it. The porch became more than a place I escaped to. It was a place I invited him into when I wanted to share the version of quiet that nourished me. We made coffee there some mornings and didn't talk until the second sip. He learned how to sit beside my silence without trying to turn it into conversation. I learned how to bring him a sentence I'd been saving without making it a test he could fail. I read a poem today, I'd say, and read to lines that made me feel rearranged. He'd sit with them, not nodding too quickly, not looking for a right answer. Keep going, he'd say sometimes, and I would. Other times he'd say, leave it there, and the poem would work on us all afternoon. We practiced conflict the way people practice scales. Slowly, deliberately, knowing speed would come later if it ever mattered at all. When something snagged, we named the snag, not the person. My chest just locked, he'd say midway through a perfectly ordinary dinner. I want to ask you to stay home tomorrow because the feeling is loud. I breathed, not to calm him, but to stay inside my body. Thank you for telling me, I'd say. I'm still going to the reading. Would you like a plan for when the feeling gets loud? He'd hesitate, old instinct still strong, then say, yes, make me one. And I would. Lamp on, your book. Our song low. Text me a photo of your dinner plate because you never eat vegetables when I'm here. He'd laugh. The feeling wouldn't disappear, but it would take its shoes off. We let family back into our house slowly, like light after a nap. Our son came for dinner with the baby, who was now a toddler with knees like punctuation marks. I watched him watch us the way I stood to get more bread without narrating where I was going. The way his father didn't track the doorway with his eyes. The way we moved around each other in a room that no longer demanded proof. Later, when we were scraping plates, our son said quietly, "You feel different, not better. Not worse, just..." "True, we are," I said. He nodded like a man relieved he didn't have to pick sides between the old story and the new. There were setbacks. There always are. You don't teach the nervous system new tricks without the old ones showing off now and then. One happened on a Tuesday when the sky was the color of an argument. I took a late train back from a reading. My phone died. He waited an hour, then two. The station was loud, the cab line long, the world disinterested in our progress. When I finally walked in, breathless and damp from a sudden rain, he was at the kitchen table with both palms flat, as if holding it down. He looked up and the relief was so pure I almost dissolved. "I'm here," I said quickly, old language. He stood. He didn't scold. He didn't make a joke. He said, "I was afraid and I didn't text and I'm proud of that and I hated it." I dropped my bag and put my forehead to his. "Thank you," I said. "I'll charge the little spare battery tomorrow." We ate toast in near silence, the good kind, and went to bed with fear tired enough to sleep on its own side. Another setback came softer. Like a kindness misfiring. He brought me a new mug, thick, heavy, the kind that turns tea into an anchor. "For the porch," he said, sweetly. A reason to stay home. He didn't hear himself at first. I did. I smiled and took the mug in both hands. "For the porch," I said and carried it. Out the front door and down the steps, across the sidewalk, around the block and back inside. He watched from the window, confused, then laughing as I returned. "The porch is wherever I set this down," I said. And he pressed his lips together to keep from crying. "Got it," he whispered. "Got it." I went back to work in a way that felt like belonging to myself. Before, I'd made my career small enough to carry without bothering anyone. Now I let it take up a room. Not every room, just the one with my name on it. He asked about my projects without trying to fit them into his schedule. I told him about the days when sentences wouldn't land, and how I had learned to stop punishing the page. "What do you do instead?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Laundry," I said. "A walk. A nap I call meditation." He grinned. Living. So living. I echoed. We built rituals that didn't owe us a miracle. Thursday separated on purpose. Sunday morning pancakes, even if one of us was sad. A standing rule. If you can't say the whole truth, try a truer sentence than last time. Another, no arguments in the car. Pause, music on, resume where there are chairs. Another, maybe my favorite, when fear knocks, the person not afraid answers the door. There was also tenderness with edges because adults live there. One evening he asked if I'd stay in rather than go to a friend's reading. The old request dressed in new politeness. "I had a hard day," he said. I could feel the weather shift in him. "I hear you," I said. "I'm still going. I'll be home by 10. He nodded, shoulders tight, then said he might call a friend, which I quietly celebrated. At 9:30 he texted, "Take your time." At 10:15 I came in to find him on the couch, sleepy and clear-eyed. "Welcome back," he said. "Welcome forward," I answered. And he laughed so openly I thought, we are being given our 30s and our 50s, intimacy. The physical kind started to feel less like proving and more like listening. We gave each other maps without pretending they were contracts. "Tonight I want to be held until I stop thinking," I'd say. Or he'd say, "I want to start with talking and see if talking is enough," and sometimes it was. We learned how to ask without the question sounding like an audit. "Is this okay? Can I change my mind?" Slower, "Stay." We learned how to hear no without hearing rejection. How to hear yes without hearing obligation. This is a sentence I never thought I'd say with ease. It's easier to want. When wanting isn't being measured. He started seeing a counselor on his own. Not as penance, not as proof he loved me, but because he was tired of being run by a boy who had to master absence to survive it. He came home from a session one Tuesday with eyes that looked rained on and said, "I want to love you because, not in case." He wrote it on an index card and taped it inside the cabinet with the tea bags. We leave little altars all over the house now, phrases that help us turn back toward each other. Ask twice, answer once, then breathe, don't fix, witness. On a long drive to visit friends, he dozed. And I watched the road unspool like a ribbon you can't keep. I thought about the early years, how fast I would have traded my voice for a promise. How easy it is to mistake constant checking for care. How scary it is to meet the world as to unmerged people and still choose. I touched his arm lightly, the way you touch something you plan to keep, and he woke, smiling. "Where are we?" he asked. "Together," I said, and he nodded like geography had finally learned our names. We are not a miracle. We are not a warning. We are what happens when two people decide to arrive and keep arriving even when the weather changes. Some nights the border in our bed goes quiet and we wander across it like neighbors borrowing sugar. Some nights the border is a river and we wave. Promise to meet at the bridge in the morning. And then we do. If you're listening with your phone on the nightstand, trying not to make the same old bargain, I'll become smaller if you'll stay. I want to say this slowly. The way truth needs to be said. You don't earn love by being reachable. You don't protect love by making yourself a checkpoint. You grow love by becoming a place both of you can return to without shrinking first. We didn't get here by being better. We got here by telling the truth before we were sure we could survive it. Sometimes I still put my hand in the middle of the bed and wait. Sometimes he finds it. Sometimes he doesn't. Either way, I don't disappear. Either way, morning comes and there is coffee and a soft, ordinary sentence like a blessing across the table. Welcome back. I started keeping a small calendar on the fridge, the paper kind with squares too small for big lies. I wrote only verbs in it. Not places. Not appointments. Verbs. Read, walked, called, laughed, cried, stayed. He added his own. In pencil at first. Like a guest who isn't sure he belongs, waited, listened, asked again, cooked, didn't fix. It sounds simple. It was a revolution. Our day stopped being a list of coordinates and became a record of presence. If a square had nothing in it, we didn't call it wasted. We called it rested. On Mondays I met a small circle of women at the library. Not a formal group. Just 5 chairs that learned the shape of our spines. We brought whatever we were reading and left with whatever we could carry of each other's lives. The woman who ran the children's desk, silver hair, sensible shoes, liked to pass our table and say, I keep the quiet ready for you, like someone setting a place at dinner. He asked about the group when I came home, not for surveillance, but for story. What line broke you? He'd say, and I'd repeat something that wasn't meant as advice but worked like medicine. Anyway, he began his own circle on Wednesdays. Men who had been taught to measure themselves in outcomes and were tired of graduating into silence. They met in the back of a carpenter's shop where the sawdust made every apology smell like cedar. At first they stood, all of them, like sitting might be an admission. Then one week they sat. Then someone cried. Then someone laughed without telling a joke. They started writing verbs too. Some afternoons I walked to a bakery where the owner knew how to leave you alone and still say your name with sugar. I sat by the window and practiced liking the world without needing it to prove anything. Sometimes I wrote sentences that weren't ready to be read by anyone. Sometimes I counted birds. Sometimes I did nothing, which is a discipline disguised as laziness. If I stayed late, I texted not because he could not endure the not knowing, but because I wanted to let him into a moment I was keeping. The light looks like honey tonight. He sent back photos of the dog sleeping on a sun-warmed square of floor, or of onions browning like a good rumor. Welcome forward, he typed. Sometimes our private joke for the life we're growing. Not everything was tender. Habit shows up in armor when it's threatened. There was a weekend trip with friends where the house had too few rooms, and the laughter had too many opinions. On the second night, in a kitchen that had decided to be loud, a man made an easy joke about wives taking off, and the table did that thing tables do, tilted their attention, as if the floor had given way a little. I felt intense beside me, fear rushing to the door like a draft. He didn't grip my knee. He didn't ask if we could go. He put his palm, open, on the table between us and left it there like a lighthouse. I set mine down beside it, not covering, not holding, just light answering light. The subject changed. The storm left because it couldn't find a narrative to ride out another time. I forgot our Thursday on purpose. Not from cruelty, from a kind of joy that got out of hand. A friend invited me to a last-minute gallery opening. I went, meaning to stay an hour. I stayed 3. At 10:30 I looked at my phone and felt the old shame reach for me like a coat I didn't want to wear anymore. I walked home fast, breath white in the cold, rehearsing explanations I no longer believed in. He was on the couch with a book when I came in, 2 mugs waiting like parentheses. He looked up and said the sentence that remade the room, I missed you without making it your job. I sat down and cried the way a person cries when language finally keeps its promise. We drank the 2 hot tea and didn't call it a test passed. We called it weather learned. We began to practice a different kind of telling. Not the tidy report at day's end, what got accomplished, what broke and was mended, but the soft midstream confession. I'm overwhelmed. I changed my mind. I want to be touched, but I don't want to talk. I want to talk, but I don't want to be touched. At first the sentences sounded like we were reading cards in a doctor's office. Then they started sounding like us. It changed how we fought, which is to say it changed how we stayed when we didn't agree. I learned not to stack old furniture in the doorway of a new argument. He learned not to audit my tone before hearing my meaning. We made a rule that saved us more than once. Explain what you're afraid will happen. Not what you think I'm doing. He'd say, I'm afraid I'll be left alone with a feeling that has my mother's handwriting. And I'd say, I'm afraid I'll become a hallway again. And there we were to people. Not to prosecutions, asterisk he started cooking more. Not as penance, as play. He'd put on a record and invite me to dance while onion softened. Our steps small to keep the rhythm from tripping. Some evenings we burned the first thing and ate it anyway, deciding to call it smoked. Other nights the meal tasted like we remembered the recipe for joy. He touched my waist when he needed to find the counter blind. And I'd lean my shoulder against his when I didn't want to interrupt the chop. The kitchen learned us there was a scare because life keeps the syllabus full. Our son called from near nothing mortal, but enough to remind everyone that time is a hallway with doors you can't always open. We drove in the quiet that means both people are praying without words. At a red light he reached for my hand and then stopped, not out of pride, out of awareness. I'm reaching because I'm scared, he said aloud for both of us. Take it if you want, don't if you don't. I took it. Not because he needed me to. Because I wanted to. Sometimes that's the only difference that matters. We sat with our son and his wife and did the unfancy courage of families who love each other. Bad vending machine coffee. Jokes that don't land but make the air easier to breathe. The permission to be tired in front of witnesses. On the drive home he said, there was a time I would have punished you without knowing it, for needing to pee when I needed proof you wouldn't leave. I laughed in that astonished way you laugh when someone names a secret you didn't want to admit was ever real. There was a time, I said, I would have held it. Spring arrived with its annual audacity flowers where there was dirt, light where there was the memory of light. We got bolder with our invitations. Come to the porch, I'd call, and he would come not because he feared what happened when he didn't, but because there was a sentence he wanted to lay down next to mine. He started asking questions that had no useful answers. When did you first feel like yourself? What did you survive that you wish you hadn't had to survive? What is your favorite useless thing? Ribbon, for me. For him, a tiny screwdriver that fixes glasses and occasionally faith. I began to write again in earnest. Not to prove I had a self because having one felt less like a secret. He read drafts with the respect of a man who knows he's being trusted with wet clay. Tell me where it breathes, I'd say. He would circle a paragraph and write, right here. Because he learned the one compliment, I believe I hear you. On a Tuesday that looked like any other. The doorbell rang and delivered a package neither of us remembered ordering. Inside, a small wind chime, copper, hand-hammered with a note from one of the Wednesday men. For Thursdays when the quiet is loud, let it be the sound of each other coming back. He hung it on a hook beneath the eave. The first time it sang, the day was windless. We looked at each other like people who don't need much proof anymore and still enjoy receiving it. We went away for a weekend to a town that had more bookstores than traffic lights. We rented a room above a shop where someone was always stacking new spines and old stacks. The proprietor left a note on the nightstand, the kettle sticks. Jiggle the switch. The lamp is kind but stubborn. We laughed because that described us. In the morning we walked without itinerary and let the day decide where we belonged. At a bridge he asked me, do you ever miss the way we were? I thought about the ledger, the inventory, the way both of us kept receipts for love. I miss not knowing better, I said. It looked easier from far away. He nodded. And now? Now I like the price because I know what we're buying, asterisk we didn't become saints. The old instincts show up like relatives unannounced, bearing casseroles you didn't ask for. Once, after a long day of interruptions, he found me in the doorway and said, too quickly, stay tonight, with that frightened sound that turns a request into a leash. I put a hand on his chest, steady, not scolding. Try again, I said, soft. He closed his eyes, opened them. Will you stay close tonight? There it was. I smiled. Yes, and not because you're scared, he smiled back. And not because you owe me, he said. We went to bed and the room kept both our truths without forcing them to wrestle. Our verbs changed as the year did. On the calendar I wrote, sang, forgot, returned, forgave, laughed wrong and then right. Waited kindly, he added, didn't count, didn't check. Felt 7, named it. Felt 52, let it, held, witnessed, and some days we wrote nothing at all. Which meant the life itself was a sentence. If you're listening to this and thinking of your own bed, your own doorways, your own calendar with boxes full of coordinates and not much presence, here's what I can tell you without pretending to be a teacher. You can begin with one verb, arrived. Breathed, asked, state that you can put your pillow where you belong. You can tell the truth before you know if it will fix anything. You can let someone miss you without becoming their antidote. There is a moment, if you keep practicing, when the room starts greeting you instead of inspecting you. When the person who loves you says, welcome back, and means welcome, as you are, and the house stubborn, kind learns to be home for both of you. Tonight the wind chime rings even though the trees are still. He looks up from his book like a man who has learned to enjoy unearned music. I close my laptop and meet him where the couch has learned our names. He doesn't ask for proof. I don't offer it. We put our hands in the middle like we have a bridge and not a border. The clock decides to be quiet. Welcome back, he says. Welcome forward, I answer. We don't need a moral. We need a chair that fits. We sit. We started talking about old age the way people talk about weather speculatively, as if it might happen to someone else first. It wasn't morbid. It was practical, almost tender. He'd pass a hand over his hair in the mirror and say, "What if I go first?" And I'd say, "Then I'll keep the lamp warm." I'd fold a sweater and ask, "What if I go first?" And he'd say, "Then I'll keep the kettle singing." We weren't bargaining with fate. We were practicing presents for a time that hadn't arrived yet. Our granddaughter discovered the wind chime before she learned the word for it. She clapped at the copper sound and looked to us like we'd made music with our hands. One evening, she stood under it and said very seriously, "Ring?" It didn't, she frowned. Then blew at it with a mouth too small for such ambition and laughed. When it yielded the faintest answer, "Sometimes," I told her, "things sing when you don't push." She filed that away in whatever drawer children keep their magic. We taught her verbs, too, because the calendar had taught us. On a big sheet of paper on the kitchen floor we drew boxes with fat markers, and wrote what the day had contained. Jumped, napped, shared, cried. Tried again. She loved tried again. She'd point to it with a finger sticky from fruit and say, solemnly, "Gain." He tapped the word "witnessed," one of his favorites now, and she'd tap it, too, as if declaring herself a noticer before kindergarten. There were doctor appointments we didn't romanticize. Nisa kept a diary of every stair we'd ever climbed, a new quiet in his left ear that made certain restaurants feel like airplanes. We didn't turn our bodies into projects to be solved or fears to be obeyed. We treated them like houses we had promised to live in kindly. We walked, we stretched. We let the afternoon sun count our breaths. We laughed when we forgot why we'd opened a cabinet and wrote "forgot" on the calendar. Like it was an event, not a failure. Grief did not retire. It came back wearing new coats. A friend's diagnosis. A neighbor's sudden absence from the morning walk. The kind of news that tilts a week. We didn't make speeches. We made soup. We said each other's names like an anchor when the current felt rude. He learned to say, "I'm heavy," and not confuse it with "hold me up or I'll fall." Some nights I lay with my head on his chest and listened to the soft metronome and thought, this is the sound of a body that stayed. Not because I required it, because it chose to once, during a storm that had the sky rehearsing its anger. The power blinked and the house went dark. We lit candles and played the old game of naming constellations out of nothing. Cupboard, shoulder. The shape the shadows made on the ceiling that looked like a bird deciding whether to land. He told me a story about his mother he'd never told. How she used to hum while she packed a bag. How the hum changed key when she set the bag down and stayed after all. His voice didn't break. Mine did, not out of pity. Out of witnessing the courage it takes to stop punishing the present with the past. We started a small ritual on Sundays. After pancakes, after reading, after the second cup, we'd sit at the table and write letters to the week ahead. Not lists, letters. Dear Monday. Be gentle. Dear Thursday. Hold your border steady. We'll cross it with care. Dear Friday. Surprise us without breaking anything. We'd fold them and tuck them under the wind chime string, like giving the air permission to help. Silly, effective, most sacred things are. He began taking photographs. Not of sunsets or grand gestures. Of corners. The way a book leans against another book like a shoulder after a long day. The shape of steam from a kettle against a window that has learned our breaths. He'd bring the prints home from the little shop that's still new paper and say, "Look, I found her life." We framed 3 and left the rest in a box by the couch. A trove we could hold when conversation felt like too sharp a tool. Our son asked us, one night after the toddler's bath, how we'd done it stayed without turning into furniture. I said, we stopped negotiating with fear. He said, we started telling the truth before it had a solution. Our son nodded. Eyes wet with the debt of histories he couldn't fully repay, and didn't need to. Teach me to say welcome back, he whispered later at the door as if the phrase were a password. Practice on yourself first, I told him. Then on her. He kissed our cheeks and went out into a world that was, against the odds, kinder than it used to be. Sometimes the border still appears in our bed like a river stubborn after a rain. On those nights we don't pretend it's a path. We wave, we sleep. We meet for coffee in the morning like diplomats who have learned the miracle of patience. Other times we fall asleep touching ankles, the most unromantic, faithful communion, and wake to find the river gone. Neither state is a report card. Both are weather on a late autumn afternoon. In a park that smelled like leaves, remembering the trees. He turned to me and asked a question with no crisis hanging from it. What do you hope I know about you before we're 80? I laughed half at the audacity of imagining we might make it that far. Half of the audacity of answering. That I kept arriving, I said. Even when I was tired. Even when I wanted to earn love the old way. He nodded. I hope you know I kept letting you, he said. Even when I wanted to lock the door. We sat with that. It didn't solve anything. It solved everything. We begun talking about the house the way captains talk about ships. What needs tending? What can be beautiful when it's mended, not replaced? The porch boards will need sanding next year. The roof will need a quiet hero with a ladder and dignity. We don't dread it. We like having a place that asks for us in honest ways. He joked once that the house is our third character, stubborn, kind, dramatic when it rains. I told him if the house ever writes a memoir, it should be called Welcome Back, he said. Or Welcome Forward, and we agreed the house is allowed to titles near winter. The library group threw a small party for nothing my favorite kind. We brought pies that looked like we trusted our hands more than recipes. The silver-haired librarian raised a paper cup and said, to verbs, with that dry humor of people who have seen too much and still vote for tenderness. He lifted his cup, too, and added, to not counting. And everyone laughed the relieved laugh of the formerly measured. If you're listening now with your own lamp on, the one you keep to dim out of habit, I want to tell you the thing we learned that I didn't expect. Showing up for yourself doesn't make less love. It makes room for love that doesn't have to pass inspection to exist. You do not have to turn leaving into a sermon or staying into a cage. You can open a window. You can put your pillow in the middle. You can hang a small chime and let air do what it does when no one tells it which way to move. Tonight, he is slicing apples for a tart that will be slightly wrong and perfect because we made it. He hums under his breath, not the tune of packing, but the tune of standing still. I wash the knife and hand it back to him like a ceremony too ordinary for guests. The wind outside is quiet. The chime rings anyway. He looks up. That familiar question soft in his eyes, do you hear it? And I nod because I do. We eat at the counter like people who are not rehearsing a performance, just participating in a life. After, we write our verbs. He chooses aloud. I choose arrived. We leave the square half empty on purpose. The way you leave a chair open and a table for the next good sentence. We go to bed without proving anything. The border doesn't show up, or it does. Either way, there's room. He says the words like closing a well-loved book. Welcome back. Welcome forward, I answer. And the house, stubborn and kind, keeps the lamp warm for whatever we become next.